The silence in the martial arts studio was deafening. 23 people had just watched a janitor do the impossible. Turn a black belt instructor into a humbled, apologetic man with nothing more than a gentle touch and a few quiet words. But what they didn't know was that Adrian Coleman had spent the last 20 years trying to forget he was once called Thunder Coleman, the undisputed heavyweight boxing champion of the world. The mop in his calloused hands had replaced gloves that once commanded millions of dollars per fight. The fluorescent lights overhead had replaced the bright spotlights of Madison Square Garden. And the respect he had just earned from a room full of strangers had cost him the very thing he'd worked so hard to protect, his anonymity. Welcome to my channel, where I share real stories with unexpected twists. If you like what you hear, please hit subscribe and give me a thumbs up. It really means a lot to me. Now, let's begin this story. Adrian Coleman pushed his cleaning cart through the doors of Elite Martial Arts Academy every Tuesday and Thursday evening at exactly 9:15 p.m. The timing was no accident. His 17-year-old daughter, Luna, had kickboxing classes that ended at 9, and this job let him keep an eye on her without her knowing. At 42, he had mastered the art of being invisible, a skill that had taken him 20 years to perfect. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he began mopping the main training floor. Students filtered out in small groups, their conversations echoing off the mirrored walls. Luna appeared near the women's locker room, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, still catching her breath from the evening's training. She waved at a few friends and headed toward the exit, completely unaware that her father was watching from behind his janitorial uniform. "Good night, Mr. Coleman," called Vera Martinez, a 24-year-old purple belt who always stayed late to practice her forms. She was one of the few students who bothered learning his name. "Have a good evening, Miss Martinez," Adrian replied, continuing his methodical cleaning routine. Vera reminded him of his younger sister, determined, fearless, always standing up for what was right. His sister had died in a car accident 15 years ago, another reason he'd left his former life behind. The advanced class was running late tonight. Instructor Tristan Blake stood in the center of the mat, adjusting his pristine black belt while addressing 8 remaining students. Blake was everything Adrian had learned to avoid: loud, arrogant, and constantly proving his dominance over others. "Remember, hierarchy exists for a reason," Blake announced, his voice carrying across the empty space. "Respect is earned through dedication, discipline, and understanding your place in the martial arts world." Adrian continued mopping, keeping his movements small and unobtrusive. He had perfected the art of cleaning, around people without interrupting their activities. But as he worked near the edge of the mat, Blake's voice grew sharper. "Speaking of understanding your place," Blake said, his eyes landing on Adrian with an unpleasant smile. "Hey, Janitor, how about helping us with a demonstration?" Adrian kept mopping, hoping the instructor would lose interest. He had been in situations like this before, people using their perceived authority to humiliate service workers. Usually, he could deflect with politeness and disappear into the background. "I'm talking to you," Blake continued, his voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "The guy with the mop." Adrian stopped cleaning and looked up slowly. 20 years of staying invisible had taught him to read people quickly. Blake's stance, The way he held his shoulders, the slight smirk on his face. This man was looking for entertainment at someone else's expense. "Just finishing up here, sir," Adrian replied calmly. "Don't want to interrupt your class." Blake laughed, a sound that made several students shift uncomfortably. "Oh, you won't be interrupting. You'll be participating. I think my students could benefit from seeing the difference between someone who trains seriously and someone who, well, pushes a mop for a living." Vera Martinez stepped forward slightly. "Sensei Blake, maybe we should just continue with regular training. It's getting late." Blake's eyes snapped to her with obvious irritation. "Vera, are you questioning my teaching methods? Because if you can't respect the learning process, maybe you should find another gym." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Adrian recognized the look of fear that flashed across Vera's face, the same expression he'd seen in mirrors 20 years ago when reporters asked invasive questions about his personal life, when promoters made decisions about his career without consulting him, when powerful people used their positions to make others feel small. "Actually," Adrian said quietly, setting his mop aside, "if it would help your students learn something valuable, I'm willing to help." Blake's smile widened. "Excellent. Everyone gather around. You're about to see a practical demonstration of what happens when martial arts meets, well, real life." As the students formed a circle around the mat, Adrian felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced in 2 decades. Not anger. He had learned to transform that emotion into something more useful. It was the calm, focused energy that had once made him the most feared heavyweight boxer in the world. Sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the most extraordinary revelations. Blake gestured dramatically for his students to sit around the edge of the mat. "Tonight, you'll witness why there are appropriate places for different types of people. Elite training facilities aren't for everyone." Adrian stepped onto the mat, his work boots making soft sounds against the padded surface. He had spent countless hours on training mats that looked exactly like this one, but that was a lifetime ago. Now he was just a father trying to make an honest living while keeping his past buried. "So, Janitor," Blake continued, circling Adrian like a predator, "have you ever been in a real fight? Or do you just battle dirt and dust all day?" Several students laughed nervously. Adrian noticed that Vera wasn't laughing. Her dark eyes held a mixture of concern and something else, the same instinct that had made his sister step between bullies and their victims. "I try to avoid fights, sir," Adrian replied honestly. "Violence usually makes things worse, not better." "How philosophical," Blake sneered. "But philosophy doesn't work when someone's coming at you with bad intentions. Marcus, show our friend here a basic defensive stance." A young man in a brown belt demonstrated a textbook guard position. Blake nodded approvingly, then turned back to Adrian. "Your turn. Let's see if you can copy what someone with actual training just showed you." Adrian hesitated. Any defensive stance he demonstrated would reveal years of professional training. Instead, he stood naturally, hands at his sides, weight evenly distributed. To an untrained eye, he looked completely vulnerable. To anyone who truly understood fighting, his positioning was perfect. "Interesting choice," Blake observed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The do nothing and hope for the best approach. Very effective, I'm sure." "Sensei Blake," Vera interrupted again, standing up from where she'd been sitting. "This doesn't feel like training. It feels like bullying." The room fell silent. Blake's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. No student had ever challenged him so directly in front of others. "Vera Martinez," Blake said slowly, using her full name like a weapon. "You seem to have strong opinions about my teaching methods. Perhaps you'd like to explain to everyone why a purple belt thinks she knows better than a third-degree black belt." Adrian watched Vera's jaw clench with determination that reminded him painfully of his sister. "Because respect goes both ways, Sensei. Martial arts should teach us to protect people, not humiliate them." Blake took a step toward Vera, his posture shifting into something more aggressive. "And maybe you should learn when to keep your mouth shut and let your betters handle things." That was when something fundamental changed in Adrian's breathing. For 20 years, he had walked away from conflicts. He had swallowed insults, ignored provocations, and disappeared into anonymity. But watching a brave young woman stand up for principles he had abandoned was awakening something he thought he had buried forever. "Actually," Adrian said, his voice carrying a new quality that made everyone turn toward him, "the young lady is absolutely right." Blake spun around, his face now openly hostile. "Oh, really? And what makes you an expert on martial arts philosophy?" Adrian looked directly into Blake's eyes for the first time. "Experience." The single word hung in the air with weight that nobody in the room could quite understand. Blake felt something shift in the atmosphere, like the moment before lightning strikes. The janitor's posture hadn't changed, but something about his presence had become different. "Experience cleaning up after real fighters?" Blake laughed, but the sound came out forced. "That's not the same as being one." "No," Adrian agreed quietly. "It's not." Blake decided to escalate. "You know what? Let's make this educational. I'll show these students what happens when untrained civilians think they can stand up to people who've dedicated their lives to martial arts." He assumed his fighting stance, feet shoulder-width apart, hands raised in a classic boxing guard. It was technically sound, exactly what someone would learn in a good martial arts program. Blake had been training for 8 years and teaching for 3. He had competed in several amateur tournaments and won most of his matches. Adrian remained motionless, hands still at his sides, but everyone in the room could feel that something had changed about him. Vera noticed it first, the way his breathing had become deeper and more controlled, the subtle shift in how he carried his weight, the absolute stillness that radiated contained power. "Last chance to back down," Blake announced, bouncing slightly on his feet. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you insist on disrespecting this dojo." Adrian closed his eyes briefly. In that moment, he wasn't in a martial arts studio in Denver. He was back in training gyms in Philadelphia and Las Vegas, hearing the sound of heavy bags being hit, smelling the sweat and determination of fighters preparing for battles that would define their lives. He was remembering who he used to be before tragedy made him walk away from everything he loved. When Adrian opened his eyes, Blake was looking directly into the gaze of Thunder Coleman, former heavyweight champion of the world. "I respect this dojo," Adrian said quietly. "That's why I'm going to teach you what it really means. The hardest battles are often fought not with fists, but with the courage to stand for what's right." Blake attacked first, throwing a quick jab followed by a straight right hand. Both punches were technically perfect, thrown with the speed and precision that had won him several amateur competitions. Against 99% of people, the combination would have been devastating. Adrian wasn't in the 99%. He moved like water flowing around rocks. The jab passed through the space where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier. The straight right found only air as Adrian's body seemed to dissolve sideways, repositioning without effort. "What the hell?" Blake muttered, spinning to relocate his target. "Clean technique," Adrian observed, already perfectly balanced while Blake struggled to recover. "Good speed, but you telegraph every move with your shoulders." Blake threw another combination, this one more aggressive. Hook, uppercut, straight left. 3 punches thrown with increasing desperation and decreasing accuracy. Adrian avoided them all with movements so minimal they seemed almost supernatural. Vera pulled out her phone and began recording. Something extraordinary was happening, and every instinct told her to document it. "Stop moving and fight," Blake shouted, sweat beginning to form on his forehead despite having barely exerted himself. "I am fighting," Adrian replied calmly. "I'm just not trying to hurt you." Blake's face contorted with rage and embarrassment. His students were watching him fail to land a single punch on a janitor. His reputation, his authority, everything he had built was crumbling in real time. He launched his most aggressive attack yet, a flurry of punches and kicks thrown with desperate fury. Adrian moved through the assault like a ghost, each movement precise and economical. But this time, when Blake overextended on a wild hook, something different happened. Adrian was suddenly closer, having stepped inside Blake's guard while the instructor was off balance. Without any visible effort, without any dramatic movement, Adrian placed his right hand gently against Blake's chest. Blake flew backward 6 feet and landed on his back with a sound that made everyone gasp. The silence that followed was absolute. Blake lay on the mat, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had happened. There had been no pain, no violent impact, just an irresistible force that had launched him through the air like he weighed nothing. "That's impossible," Blake whispered, struggling to sit up. Vera stopped recording and quickly typed into her phone's search engine. "Thunder Coleman heavyweight boxing champion." What she found made her blood run cold. "Oh my God," she said, her voice barely audible. "You don't know who he is, do you?" Everyone turned to her. On her phone screen were dozens of articles, photos, and videos of a younger Adrian Coleman standing in boxing rings around the world, holding championship belts, being called the greatest technical heavyweight fighter of his generation. "Adrian Coleman," she read aloud, her voice growing stronger. "Also known as Thunder Coleman, undefeated heavyweight boxing champion from 2001 to 2005. Retired at age 25 following the accidental death of his sparring partner during training." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Blake's face went white as the reality of what had just happened sank in. He had challenged and been humiliated by one of the greatest fighters who ever lived. 20 years, Adrian said quietly, extending a hand to help Blake to his feet. 20 years since I've been in any kind of confrontation. I came here every week, cleaned quietly, watched my daughter train, and tried to stay invisible. Blake ignored the offered hand and stood up on shaking legs. Your daughter? Luna Coleman. She's in the youth kickboxing program. She doesn't know about my past, and I'd like to keep it that way. Vera stepped forward. Why? Why hide something so incredible? Adrian's expression grew distant. Because the last time I fought, my sparring partner, Tony Rodriguez, died. I hit him too hard during practice. He fell wrong, and he never got back up. The investigation called it an accident, but I knew the truth. I had lost control because of pressure, because of people like... He looked directly at Blake. People who use their positions to make others feel small. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the room understood now that they weren't just witnessing a physical demonstration. They were seeing a man confront demons he had been running from for 2 decades. I swore I would never fight again. Adrian continued. Never let anger or pride put someone else at risk. But watching you threaten that young woman, seeing you use your authority to humiliate people, I realized that sometimes staying silent is worse than fighting. Blake's transformation was immediate and painful to watch. The arrogant instructor was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the magnitude of his own ignorance. I didn't know, Blake stammered. If you had known, would you have treated me with respect? Adrian asked gently. Or would you have found some other janitor, some other worker to humiliate for your students' entertainment? The question cut deeper than any physical blow could have. Blake realized that Adrian had identified the root of his real problem, not ignorance about credentials, but the fundamental arrogance that made him believe he could demean people based on their occupations. You're right, Blake said finally, his voice thick with shame. I'm sorry. To you, to Vera, to everyone here. There's no excuse for what I did. Adrian nodded, accepting the apology with the same grace he had shown throughout the confrontation. Apologies are important, but they're just the beginning. The question is, what are you going to do differently from now on? Vera looked around the room at the other students, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their faces. Mr. Coleman, would you consider teaching here? Because I think we could all learn more from someone who understands that real strength comes with responsibility. Adrian smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him all evening. Maybe, but not to teach fighting techniques, to teach something much more important. That respect isn't earned with belts or titles, but with character. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not by defeating others, but by finding the courage to become who we're meant to be. 3 months later, Elite Martial Arts Academy had been transformed in ways nobody could have predicted. Adrian Coleman was no longer just the evening janitor. After several conversations with the gym owner and a background check that revealed his legendary fighting career, he had been offered a position as a philosophy instructor and conflict resolution specialist. Sensei Adrian, Vera said after a class on respect and leadership, thank you for showing me that true strength doesn't need to prove itself to be recognized. Adrian finished organizing the training equipment, a habit from his janitorial days that he maintained. The most important lesson I can teach is simple, Vera. Never judge someone by their profession, their appearance, or their circumstances. Everyone carries stories that can surprise us. Luna Coleman still didn't know her father's full history. Adrian had decided to let her discover it naturally when she was ready. For now, she was simply proud that her dad had found work doing something he loved at the place where she trained. Blake still taught at the academy, but his entire approach had changed. The humiliation of that night had forced him to examine not just his teaching methods, but his fundamental beliefs about hierarchy and respect. His classes now focused as much on character development as physical technique. "I lost half my students that first week," Blake admitted to Adrian one evening after class. "The video Vera recorded went viral. Everyone saw me get humbled by a janitor." "How do you feel about that now?" Adrian asked, genuinely curious. Blake considered the question carefully. "Embarrassed, but also grateful. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone my younger self would have been ashamed of." The conversation was interrupted by a group of new students entering the academy. Adrian watched Blake greet them with genuine warmth and respect, taking time to learn their names and understand their goals. The change was remarkable and appeared to be genuine. "You know what I've learned?" Blake continued. "The hardest person to fight is yourself, especially the parts of yourself you don't want to admit exist." Adrian nodded. "That's why I stayed hidden for 20 years. I was afraid that Thunder Coleman was still in there somewhere, still capable of losing control. But that night, I realized I had been fighting the wrong battle." Vera approached with a question about an upcoming tournament. As she walked away, Blake asked, "Do you ever miss it? The recognition, the fame, the glory?" Adrian watched his daughter practice her forms across the gym, her movements becoming more confident and precise each week. "I thought I missed the fighting, but what I really missed was the feeling of using my abilities to make a positive difference. I just had to find a new way to do it." The evening classes were winding down. Students bowed respectfully to their instructors and began filtering out into the Denver night. Adrian started his cleaning routine, but now it felt different. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was simply taking care of a place that had become important to him. "Dad," Luna called out as she gathered her gear. "Are you sure you don't mind staying late to clean? I can wait and help you." "I don't mind at all, sweetheart. This place has given me more than I ever gave it." As Luna headed to the parking lot where her friend's mother was waiting, Adrian reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him to this moment. 20 years of guilt and hiding had ended not with a dramatic revelation, but with a simple choice to stand up for what was right. Vera was the last student to leave. "Sensei Adrian, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That night when you finally revealed who you were you afraid?" Adrian considered the question while adjusting the training equipment. "Terrified. Not of fighting Blake, but of everyone knowing my story, of losing the quiet life I had built, of my daughter seeing me differently. And now? Now I understand that hiding from who you are isn't the same as finding peace. Real peace comes from using your experiences, even the painful ones, to help others." Vera smiled and headed for the door. "See you Thursday, Sensei." As the academy grew quiet, Adrian finished his cleaning and turned off the lights. He no longer worked as a janitor, but he still preferred to be the last person to leave. It gave him time to think, to appreciate how much his life had changed, because of one night when he decided that some things were more important than staying invisible. Walking to his car, Adrian passed the mirror on the wall where a small plaque now hung. It read, "Respect is not about what you can do to others, but what you choose to do for others. AC. Sometimes justice comes quietly, like thunder that transforms everything without making a sound. Adrian had proven that true strength isn't about defeating opponents, but about having the courage to become who you're meant to be when others need you most. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and hit that thumbs up button. Share it with someone who might need to hear that their past doesn't define their future, but their character defines their legacy. Until next time, remember that we all have more power to make a difference than we realize.